Folks, we're all here in small business and we all have a story. The purpose of my presentation this morning is to, number one, share my story. Number two, share my experiences through COVID. And then number three, give you just one takeaway, but it's a powerful takeaway and it's already been touched on this morning. So my story begins in the late 80s, 1989. I finished high school in the southern suburbs of Sydney and I had an interest in television production. I'd already done work experience at Channel 7, Mobbs Lane in year 10 and went back through years 11 and 12 and helped out for free. I got a job at a small production house and we did large events, corporate video and some television. So I moved over, Marty was a really good mentor at the radio station and helped me a lot and showed me how to do good in the community and use the radio to do that. And we certainly did that over the years through my time on Mix 106.3, and I think one of the pinnacles of that was raising over $100,000 for the Canberra Hospital Association, and we basically bought a brand new ambulance with a mobile humidity crib in it. So there was one already in Canberra, but this one serviced the greater capital region. And for premature kids, who knows how many lives that saved. So 104.7, I moved down onto breakfast. I did 3 years on breakfast there, then back onto mornings. And we moved over to Mix 106.3 in 2008. Where I did breakfast in 2008 through until 2012. And so it came time then to start thinking about what I was going to do after radio. Couldn't stay in Canberra all my life, but my family was here. There was no way that I could move away from the area, and that was okay. I accepted that. So I started to think about a 5-year plan and what I could do post radio. So I left the radio business. I kept a shift on Saturday mornings and I kept some presenting roles, the Canberra Raiders ground announcing and a number of other roles as well, because presenting is what I absolutely love doing. And so the 5-year plan had me at the end of that opening some sort of business. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what it looked like. And I certainly had no business experience. So I had to go out and learn that. So I went away. First job that I had straight out of radio was working down at Actu AGL in the sponsorship and events team. And that taught me good corporate governance. There was lots of systems in place and I suddenly became a small cog in a very big machine, and how did I deal with that and how did I work my way through that to make things happen. So I learned a lot there at the corporate level. I then went down and I had the role of assistant general manager at Federal Golf Club. Now, I was a playing member there, and at no stage would I have ever thought that I would be able to be hold a role like that at the club. That taught me a lot about marketing and communications, and it also taught me a lot about how to deal with boards and members who know everything about everything. And so we were able to navigate my way. You can see the golfers in the room. They know exactly who I'm talking about. So that taught me a lot about boards and how to navigate my way through there. And then I went up, I did a small role at a little company called Raging Digital, now RD Consulting. That was in and around marketing and communications. And then I worked at the Canberra Business Chamber. And that showed me the importance of networking, and we'll get to that in a moment. One role I did have at the Business Chamber, and again, this is a wonderful way to give back to the community. For 2 days a week out of a 12-month period, I managed a program called the Inclusion in Employment Project. So ACT Office for Disability was one of the stakeholders, the Business Chamber, and also the Disability Reference Group as well. And so the goal of the project was to place 10 people with disability into 10 real and meaningful roles, and then show small business that yes, there are obstacles, but those obstacles are far outweighed by the mere element of diversity and having a diverse workplace. And so that was a very, very successful program. Not only did we place 10 people, but in the first 12 months, we placed over 40 people into real and meaningful roles. And that was here in Canberra. And then there was other people in Melbourne and Sydney who learned what we were doing, and they started placing people as well. So that's something that I'm very, very proud of. And so then we moved to, we've got a whole bunch of experience. What are we going to do? What does the business look like? Well, in the background, I was starting to develop the business, develop programs. It was going to be in and around speaking and showing people how to speak. Presenting was definitely a part of it as well. So I started to develop a business plan, and the business plan had 5 real reasons for why I started the business. And one of those reasons, I won't go through all of them, one of them was so that I could stand in front of people and say, I'm very proud that I'm running my own successful business. The commander's intent that sits on top of every page that I do, so that is the umbrella statement for my business, simply states to be the first choice when it comes to public speaking training and media training, and to be the #1 option for the best presenting roles in Canberra. And so anything that I do within my business has to sit under that commander's intent. And then the business plan goes down to model my different clients and what they look like, and had some budget in there as well. The marketing plan was the next thing to come. How was I going to get myself out there? So networking, definitely one part of it. We'll get to that in a moment. However, I didn't want to spread myself too thin across a wide area. So I have 3 main marketing channels. #1, my website. I put most effort into my website. All other marketing satellites the website. 2 other digital platforms. #1, LinkedIn, absolute must if you're in business. Learn how to LinkedIn, learn how to connect people, and don't just hit connect, but send them a message. And so use LinkedIn. And #2, while I still consider Facebook to be the devil's forum, and I know it has done good in the world, there is much more bad that comes out of Facebook, in my opinion. It's a must for marketing. So I have a very good Facebook page as well that I contribute to, and I use a lot of video and produce my own video and put that in. So that's my marketing mix. And I was challenged recently by a real estate agent. I do videos for Zango, who sat down while we're out on site, and he said to me, what's your Instagram account? I said, well, I don't do Instagram. And he almost started lecturing me. And it's just like, whoa, just stop there. I do have half an idea about what I'm doing. I don't want to spread myself too thinly. And so Instagram is great for presenting, and when I'm up and I have pictures and images of video when I'm presenting, but it does nothing really for my training services. So those 3 elements are what I use as far as my marketing is concerned. So then we go to, how am I going to set goals and achieve these things? So I use a goal setting process called OKRs, which are objectives and key results. There's some businesses you might know of that use this when they were startups, so Google and Intel, and there's a number of big corporations that continue to use OKRs. So it's merely a method of goal setting. So instead of just writing a goal down at the beginning of the year and hoping that you're going to achieve that, there's a real process. So the objective is the goal, it's the stated goal. And then the key results are what makes that goal happen. And so one of my OKRs at the beginning of 2022 was to get up and present one of these keynote style presentations. And so you might not realize is that for me, this is a very uncomfortable thing to do. I have spoken on air. I love interviewing people. I would much prefer to have Tara up here having a conversation, and then you as the audience taking the goodness out of that conversation and me being able to guide that conversation. That is my happy place. I also love emceeing. So standing up doing this is uncomfortable for me. David Goggins was an ex-Navy SEAL, has an excellent book called Can't Hurt Me. He writes that you should do uncomfortable things to achieve great results. And so one of my OKRs at the beginning of the year was to present one of these style of presentation. So I could have just write that down as the goal, but how did I do it? Well, I set myself timeframes. By the 1st of March 2022, I would have written a framework of what the presentation might be. Through up until June, I would have actively sought opportunities to get up, like I'm here in front of you today, and present the presentation. Then, of course, once I had the goal or had the job, I then tailor it to what the audience is looking for. And number 4, as in the key results, most importantly, once it's done, review it and then pick it apart and see how I could do it better. So I'm achieving one of my OKRs just by standing here in front of you, and I would encourage each and every one of you. John Doerr has a great audio book and a book, and it's all about OKRs, so get it if you can. It's a really good read. So where do we land as far as my services are concerned? So I have 4 core services in my business. So number 1, presenter for hire. You heard Ash say that I continue 12 seasons. I've been the ground announcer and on-screen presenter for the Canberra Raiders, so I continue to do that. I continue my Saturday morning shift on Mix 106.3, where I do a community events program and the Mix 106.3 real estate show. I'm the first drop for the breakfast show with Kristen and Nige. If one of those guys go down, I get the call up at 3 o'clock in the morning and in we go to do time on the radio. So presenter for hire, number 1. Number 2, I show CEOs and executives how to speak and present with impact. So that's one-to-one training. Number 3, I do very similar with groups of people. So groups of 6 with full day program, half day program, 2-day programs. And number 3 was an area that I didn't really start to think about until I launched my business at the very beginning of 2019, and that was media training. And so it wasn't really on the radar for me, but a lot of people had started to come to me and ask me about media training. How do I do a good interview? How do I manage media? How do I answer difficult questions? How do I navigate local media? How can I get the cut through? And so I know how to do all of that. So I built media programs. I went out, bought cameras and lights, and we do all sorts of stand-up opportunities, show people how to present well in the media. And so that's been very, very, very successful. I have trained people right up to the deputy secretary level of how to present well in the media, and I really enjoy doing that. Storytelling is one part of the presenting training that I do. Humans are wired for stories. It's the way that we've been transferring information for millennia. Well before the written language, we used stories to transfer information. And so I always talk about the fact that obviously I'm not a neuroscientist when I talk about this, but I have done a lot of reading and there's some wonderful videos as well. And so scientists have shown that when a good story is told, the brain lights up. They call it neurological breakdancing. And so there's a range of chemicals that all fire up in your brain, and there's 4 really good ones. Number 1, cortisol. So cortisol is associated with, amongst other things, the fight or flight mechanism within our bodies. And so if something happens that we're not ready for, our attention comes to the fore straight away. So we're ready to go. So cortisol. When I opened my presentation this morning, when the Beatles were very young, I guarantee that each and every one of you, no one expected me to say those words. And as soon as I said them, your attention was just a little bit more focused on what I was saying and where I was going at. Number 1, cortisol. Number 2, oxytocin. Oxytocin is associated with empathy. And so if I get up and tell a good story, then part of my audience, many of the audience, without even realizing, without having any control over it, they start to empathize with what I'm talking about. So oxytocin, number 2, very, very powerful. We also have dopamine as well. So dopamine is associated with memory. So if I stand up and tell a good story as opposed to someone who doesn't, automatically in the minds of each and every one of my audiences, there is an element of memory that is happening. So my presentation has a better chance of being remembered than Ash's wonderful emceeing earlier. And number 4 is endorphins. And so at the end of a good story, you feel good about yourself. And so endorphins are what's coursing through your veins at the end of exercise. And so endorphins are part of it as well. And so I'm going to give you an example of a really, really good story, even though I'm being shown the 5-minute mark, which is early on my clock. Thank you, Gail. In 2019, I hosted an event for a company called EML, Employers Mutual Limited. They're an insurance company and they play in the space of Sydney, Melbourne. They didn't have a presence here in Canberra. 2018, they won a government contract. And so in 2019, they organised an event to bring in EML executives to come in and meet ACT stakeholders. And so my role was the MC on the day. They had lots of speakers. They had a scientist, they had an HR expert, they had a number of people that all gave pretty good presentations. At the end of the day, a young EML executive was tasked with the idea of getting up and speaking about human-centered design. So human-centered design is a common term and it means many things to many different people and organisations. In EML land, what it means is that if I'm a policy holder and I hurt myself, I speak to someone at EML and that one person stays with me on the entire claims process to either claim or not claim. So the young executive got up and gave this presentation. He started off by asking the question, so what is human-centered design? Human-centered design is a lot like this person, Doug Dietz. Doug Dietz is an engineer. In fact, he's an excellent engineer who works for GE. Doug specialises in the design of leading-edge MRI technologies. A few years ago, Doug paid a visit to a hospital. He was excited to see one of the new range of MRI scanners that he had designed being used to help its patients. However, his excitement soon disappeared when he saw the impact that his machine was having on the patients using it. You see, this scanner was in the paediatric unit of the hospital. When Doug got to the hospital, he saw a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years of age. She was crying and telling her mum and dad how scared she was and how she wanted to go home. Doug saw the little girl's mum kneel in front of her and say the words, "You need to be brave." This experience had a profound effect on Doug. He had arrived at the hospital expecting to see the new MRI scanner in action, to hear from happy patients and happy hospital staff. But in that one moment, Doug realised that despite the machine being designed to the very best of its technology in the world, it was having an impact negatively on the humans using it. The empathy that Doug had was that he had designed an amazing product from a technical perspective, but had missed one vitally important element of the design, the patients. This was the room and the scanner and what it looked like. Now, Doug was seeing it through the eyes of the little girl and her parents, and it made him realise just how scary the experience must be to come into a room like this for a scan. So, like any good engineer, Doug started asking questions, lots of questions. And what he discovered was a series of other negative impacts that his scanner was having. From talking to the medical staff in the hospital, Doug learned that not only did the scanner look scary, but the noise of the scanner in operation was too much for many of the kids who needed to keep still while inside the machine. It resulted in over 80% of the patients, the child patients, needing to be sedated for a scan. The whole process was emotionally exhausting for the children, their parents, and the medical staff. The need to sedate so many of the child patients consumed additional hospital resources due to the anaesthetics. The additional staff needed to support this, as well as the space and the staff needed to support patient recovery. This also combined to reduce the number of patients that could be scanned any one day. So Doug went back to the drawing board. As it happened, he was just taking a human-centered design course at Stanford University's D School. And this challenge gave him the opportunity to start applying the tools and approaches that he was learning. After some further research and gaining a deeper understanding of the challenge, Doug put into practice his new and improved scanner. You see, the thing is, the scanner hadn't changed. It was still the same technology. It was still big and noisy and leading edge. However, the experience of the children, their families, and the medical staff was now dramatically different. Doug, with a little help from the members of his business, had turned the process of getting an MRI scan into an experience. And in this case, a pirate experience. The hospital waiting area and the scan room were now decked out in bright and exciting pirate-themed livery. The kids were welcomed for their scan and appointment by introducing them to the pirate adventure. The scan itself became part of the story that they'd experienced, and at some point they'd need to hide away from the pirates chasing them around, which just so happened to be inside the MRI scanning tunnel, and stay very, very still. And the noise of the scanner was the pirates running around above them, and the movement of the scanner was indeed the rocking of the ship. And so with 3 slides and 1 story, that young EML executive blew every other presenter's presentation out of the water. Storytelling is incredibly powerful, and that's something that I show people how to do. Now, I am getting the wind up here. I did want to talk a little bit about networking and how networking was something that I could fall back on in my business through COVID. Networking is amazingly important, and it's very hard for some people to do. It's hard for people to walk up to someone that they don't know and start a conversation. But in these sorts of environments, you should feel empowered to do that. And you should make it a goal, or even an OKR if it's particularly hard for you to do, to walk away from a morning like this where you have met 2 people that you don't know and had a conversation. And it's very easy to start that conversation. Just walk up to them and say, "So, how do you find yourself here? What's your place within the morning?" And you can guarantee, because people love talking about themselves, they will do all the talking. You just got to stand there and listen. So networking is actually very, very easy, but you just need to walk up to someone and ask one of those leading questions. So networking and my networks, and I worked very, very hard in setting up my business and creating those networks. And those networks through COVID saw me gainfully employed, albeit not exactly what my business model said, but gainfully employed through lockdown and then post-lockdown as well. And so the Beatles said and continued to say, "Don't worry, something will happen." And I was able to use my networks and my networking to fall back onto that very line. And I am going to take 60 more seconds, Gail. I can see you scowling at me, but that's okay. I have a perfect example of how this works. So I had a very, very busy April, my best month since 2019. And I came to May and there was not a lot of work booked in. I had my Raiders, which is great. I had the Zango videos and I had my radio. And so there was no real training and there was no big presentations for me to do. So I did for a moment think, goodness, what am I going to do? Saturday afternoon 2 weeks ago, the GWS Giants were playing the Cats here at Manuka Oval, and I'd finished my radio, I'd done some running around, and I was just about to sit down on the couch, rip the top off a beer, and watch that game on the TV. And my phone rang. It was a number that I didn't know, but I answered it anyway. It was the sports presentation team at Manuka Oval. One of their presenters had gone down with COVID. How soon can I get there? And so from 90 minutes where I was just about to sit down on the couch to 90 minutes later, I was standing on the surface of Manuka Oval with a camera right there, and a brand new co-presenter that I'd never worked with ready to do our first talk break on the big screen. The following day, I got a phone call at around about 4:30 in the afternoon. Nige from Kristen and Nige on Mix was unwell. Could I come in and do the next couple of mornings with Kristen? No problems. And so those 2 mornings then turned into a full week. And then on Tuesday, I receive a call from an organisation, and they have an awards night, and their MC has gone down with COVID. Can I do the presentation? And so it was a beautiful presentation for a group who oversees public service departments, and it was an awards night. And so I very quickly said yes. I was there on Thursday night. I then saw who was in the room, and there was no less than 6 department secretaries, one of them up on stage with me, and then all manner of people around them. And so towards the end of the night, I basically got up on stage as we were wrapping things up, and I said, I cannot let an opportunity like this pass knowing who's in the room. I'm not a public servant. I'm a small business person in Canberra. I provide 4 services. I am a presenter for hire. If you like what you've seen tonight, hire me. It got that reaction. I also show people how to speak and present with impact. Please hire me. And I show people how to work in media as well. And so they loved it. And so my other key takeaway for you this morning is, while you're networking, absolutely seize on those opportunities. Seize on them. So I know I have spoken a little longer than I was allowed to or allotted to, but I did start late as well. So it has been a pleasure speaking in front of you. OKR number 2 ticked off now for 2022. Use those words. Don't worry, something will happen. Fall back on them. Use your networks. Find 2 people here this morning before you leave that you haven't met, and introduce yourself to them. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks.
Any questions?
I've got a question. In your vast travel, I'd like to know how the technique or advice, how do you go into a new state and present and talk about that state? How do you so quickly learn what's around you or what that state is or who's there?
Perfect. It's a great question, and I have a great answer as well. So the question is, when I go into a new state, and this was very much within radio, but I am presenting in Melbourne all next week. And so the question is, how do you learn learn the landscape? So back in the day, sort of almost before the internet, if I was going to a new town, I would go and buy the UBD street directory, and I would learn the names of the streets, and I would learn the names of the suburbs, and learn the landscape. And then simply, so I would definitely introduce myself into the business community as well, and start networking as hard as I could. And I always made friends with 2 particular groups in each town that I went to. The first group was the local cops, because we're always working with the coppers anyway, either on site or on air, helping them, with announcements and whatnot. And this is not so much these days, but when I was younger, I always went and introduced myself to the local outlawed bikie group, because they were just good people to have in your back pocket if you ever needed that. So don't do that yourself now. So that's how I did it. That was the UBD street directory, learn the names, because you could always tell a brand new presenter into an area that would mispronounce the street names. All right, and when you're trying to be as local as you can in a new local area, that was one of the ways that I did it. Anton?
Cam, a few years ago, you did a session on public speaking, and one of the things that I still remember is that you said, never get nervous, get excited.
Yep, okay. So Anton's just said, and Anton did one of my speaking programs a long time ago, speaking mantras are great. So the one that resonates with Anton is, I'm excited, not nervous. So you walk to the lectern, I'm excited, not nervous. This is obviously within yourself. Excited, not nervous. Excited, not nervous. All right. I'm part of the Australian Speakers Association. There was one person who got up and his speaking mantra is, and he gets paid a lot of money to speak. Don't worry, I've already been paid. I've already been paid. I've already been paid. So I'll give you one other very, very quick trick you can see, and I do this as well. So a good speaking mantra is, don't worry, I'm in a safe place. Because and this sort of gets down to speaking with anxiety and what makes you nervous and then how to manage that. But your body, most people don't like public speaking, they don't do it very well, or both. And it's the fight, flight, or freeze reaction because your body thinks that it's in an unsafe place because your place in society matters. So it thinks that it's in an unsafe place. And so a good speaking mantra is, don't worry, I'm in a safe place. I'm in a safe place. So mentally reassure yourself. Another really good thing, and you can see, and I show this to everyone, is just put a little smiley face there. Right, and so when I look down at my notes, which I sort of didn't read from, the first thing I saw was a smiley face, and I'm sure if you go back and watch that video later, you'll see the first thing that I do is I looked up and I smiled, right? And so for people who are freaking out, you forget to smile, and you forget to have that beautiful warmth in your voice. So give yourself a visual cue. I think one more, we'll do one more. Yep, okay.
Yeah, very important one. Did you finish your beer before you went on to Marty?
No. I didn't finish my beer, but I tell you what, when I got home at 9 o'clock that night, it was the best tasting beer I'd had all day. All right. Thank you, and over to you.
Well, Cam, thank you very much. We've started by learning that stories are a good way that we take on information. And I have to say, you told us a story. You told us we have to be adaptable. We have to be flexible. And apparently we also have to be uncomfortable.
Yes, 100%.
So on behalf of everyone, thank you for telling us your story.
Okay, thank you.